Okay, greetings everyone. Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's webinar for the Enhancing School Capacity to Address Youth Violence Program. My name is Ricardo Goodrich from the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC. If you haven't done so already, as you log on, please just take a few minutes to provide your name and the school or organization that you are affiliated with in the chat, please. It always helps us to get a sense of who's joining us today. That said, today we will conclude our two-part series on family engagement. If you joined us yesterday for part one, we did a few things. We defined family engagement and talked about some of the benefits of it. As part of the discussion, we completed a continuous improvement guide that has considered several prompts, including, so who is part of family engagement planning? What are some of our goals? What are some of the barriers that we might encounter? It really helped us to have some kind of foundational conversations. So following up on our part one of our series, and again, for part two, you don't necessarily have to have watched part one. I've been there for part one. We'll certainly kind of reemphasize some of those key points. But today we're once again joined by Dr. Teresa Feister from West Ed, and also licensed marriage and family therapist Terry Baker from Nelson County Schools. So for today's session, they're going to lead us again through discussion and a few kind of engagement activities. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Teresa and Terry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's really wonderful to be back today and to be talking so much about the work that we can be doing with our schools, with our partners, with our families. I'm really looking forward to kind of digging into the strategies today. And we'll be sharing best practices based on our work and our experience, but also we're going to have lots of opportunities for y'all to share your experiences, your best practices. It's kind of like a community knowledge share opportunity. So as always, just wanted to share this slide to remind us all that the opinions and recommendations expressed in this series are ours and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Okay. So if you attended yesterday's session, I would love to ask you to take out your Plan, Do, Study, Act worksheet. But if you were not actually here yesterday, that is not a problem at all. I hopefully have figured out how to share the Google Doc well. So I just put this link in the chat. What you can do is click it and then make your own copy or download your own copy of this document rather than editing it yourself because you gotta share with everybody. So go ahead and open that up. If you already have yours, you can go ahead and take that out. We're going to be using this worksheet all day today. So this is not going to be a typical sit and get webinar. We're going to be doing the work together. So if you have the worksheet open and you're ready to go, if you could go ahead and give me a thumbs up or ready in the chat, that would be awesome. And if not, if you have questions or you need any troubleshooting, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Just want to make sure we have what we need before we get started. I think if you want to do a thumbs up, I'm just reminding myself as well. In the chat, you'll see there's a little face on the right side, and then you can choose a thumb or another emoji if you're feeling like a different emoji this morning. Okay, give us a couple minutes to confirm if we have our worksheets. Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Katricia. Awesome, Monique, thank you. Okay. All right, I'm going to keep us going just because we do have so much to get through today, but please message us if you're having trouble getting into the worksheet and we'll help you out. Okay, so as Ricardo kind of reminded us, yesterday we did a bunch of things, but we were working hard on phase one, which is plan. We created a list of the potential team members that would help, do this continuous improvement work to improve family engagement. We created a list of both barriers, things that are getting in the way of family engagement, but also facilitators, things that are helping and supporting family engagement. And then as we were closing out the meeting yesterday, I gave people homework and I said, please choose the barrier that you would like to focus on today. What is the barrier you want to prioritize? So this is really important. So it's not, I wasn't just giving homework to be mean. This is the barrier we're going to pull through today. And it's actually going to guide when Terry and I are going through all these strategies, you can be filtering through the strategies based on what your barrier is that you're focused on, right? Because not all strategies are going to address it. So before we move on, I'd love to give everyone a chance to put the barrier that they want to focus on in the chat. So if you were here yesterday, that should be pretty easy. Like you're just thinking about the one that you chose. If you weren't here yesterday, just thinking about what are the challenges that are kind of getting in the way. What's the one that you want to start with? What's the one that you want to start working with? So I'm going to give us a second. It might take some, thinking and deciding. Let's put on some music because that's what I did yesterday and it was fun. And then I'll have you just put in the chat, what is the barrier you're going to be working with today? And we'll probably give you about 3 minutes to do that. Okay, let's see. Thank you, everyone who was able to put one of your barriers in the chat. Um, I know this is a lot of thinking, especially if you're on the West Coast. It's still very early, so I appreciate you. I appreciate you. So some of the examples that I'm seeing, thank you so much for sharing. I see stigma, communication barriers, language differences, trust, communication, again, transportation. That's a big one, especially depending on where you're located. Socioeconomic factors and communication again. So it sounds like communication is going to be really key. Definitely seeing that multiple times. All right, so we can go ahead and dive in now. So we're still on phase one somehow. We're definitely still planning. But this next step is about choosing strategies. So we are going to keep in mind, right, that priority barrier that you just named. And then you're also going to think about those facilitators as well. When you are thinking about your best strategy, you want it to be addressing your barrier and you want it to be utilizing your facilitators. So we're now going to just give you a ton of strategies. Um, so we've got them organized into 4 different categories. We've got relationships, partnerships, supporting staff, and supporting families. Um, Relationships will really get into trust, right? Partnerships is really important, but I'm also thinking where we talked yesterday about there's barriers on the ends of what our families are experiencing, but also what we and our staff are experiencing. And so that's what we kind of get into with supporting staff and supporting families. To be included on this list, all strategies had to be culturally responsive, trauma-informed, strengths-based, and evidence-based. And when I say evidence-based, I'm very expansive in that. So it's not just that I've found an RCT that used this strategy, right? But it's leaning on people who are doing the work and who are able to report what's working well for them in their contexts. As we go through the strategies, which there's a lot of them, we invite you to think about that barrier and which strategies could potentially work for that barrier in your context with your team. In the worksheet that you have, there is a whole page that is blank. And up at the top, it talks about keeping an eye on the strategies that we're going through. As we're going through all of these strategies, just write down the ones that are sparking interest you think could work for your barrier. As a reminder, you will have access to these slides. Like, you do not have to write down absolutely everything. Just kind of focus on your barrier. That'll help you kind of filter down, and we'll continue to filter down as we go. Okay, so we're going to get into it. First, I'm going to start us with the family engagement strategies that focus on relationship building, particularly that they're building meaningful, trusting, and authentic relationships. On this first slide, you'll see there's 5 key suggestions. The following slides will kind of dig into each of these with specific, kind of more granular actions and behaviors. The 5 for building these relationships are welcoming families into your space and addressing barriers to attendance, offering home visit opportunities or opportunities to meet in public accessible places, communicating consistently and in accessible, trauma-informed, culturally responsive ways, establishing a variety of options for two-way communication, and sharing and celebrating good news. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dig into each of these. So this first one is the welcoming families into your space and addressing barriers to attendance. So first suggestion is having clear and welcoming signage in families' home languages, right? So there's this translation piece. It's also clear, it is welcoming. We're thinking about this if you have a space where your students or your children and youth and your families come to, that there's clear signage throughout. Specifically, if they're supposed to head somewhere in particular, you want that signage to be very clear for them. We also find that having front office staff who are fluent in families' home languages is really, really helpful. They're kind of the first faces that families are seeing, and so being able to communicate with them is really helpful. The third suggestion is family bulletins and resource rooms. So thinking about my school, we had one of the first bulletins as soon as you entered was the family bulletin. And so that's where any important resources or information, if there were permission slips that families needed access to, if there was any events coming up, they were kind of posted and had an explanation, but just kind of having a space where families know that they can go to access what they need. Um, and then the last one for this is hosting meaningful events, and that they also, for these events, right, are offering transportation support, childcare support, as well as offering flexibility that allows for different schedules. So we know a lot of barriers that families are facing is that they've got a work schedule, they've got childcare concerns, and they've got transportation concerns. So it's thinking about how do you, if you want to host an event, how are you addressing these specific barriers that you know your families are experiencing? Okay, so that's the first one. The next one is about offering home visit opportunities as well as meeting in public or accessible places. So we talked about, I think maybe we talked about this yesterday, but definitely in the Trauma Informed Schools webinar, how one of the most common barriers for families is not feeling welcome in the space. And so one of the alternatives to that is to offer home visits or to offer meeting in other places like libraries. So the first bullet here is to train staff for home visits, as well as providing the resources that they need and flexible scheduling that kind of that supports both staff and families. There's lots of really great resources about home visits, best practices for home visits, but the idea is that it is reducing families' barriers to transportation, childcare, like feelings of not belonging in the space by going to somewhere where they feel comfortable. But they also have to feel comfortable with you coming to their house, right? So that's another thing that we have to make sure that there's consent there and interest there. Another alternative is offering meetings in public spaces like libraries and other community spaces that are familiar, easily accessible to your families. So you know your community best, you know like what spaces might be there. It's also helpful to talk to your families about where they would like to meet. That's the last one, asking families where they would like to meet. All right, so moving to our next, this gets into communication, which we saw come up a bunch in your barriers. So communicating consistently and in accessible, trauma-informed, culturally responsive ways. So I'm thinking beginning of the school year or when, you know, this student, their family is new on your caseload or whatever it is, that initial connection being really, really important. But even if that's already passed, at any point, right, making that connection, introducing yourself, kind of explaining your communication plan, so how you hope to stay in touch, sharing various ways that you can be reached, and then making it personal, right? Like making sure that we can see that this is Teresa, we can see that this is Terry, right? We can kind of feel that personal connection from the beginning. Again, all materials and resources are translated to a family's home languages, right? If they can't read it, then it's like you're not even talking to them. Learning about your family's cultures and priorities is really important. Knowing what they find to be important, knowing what they care about, is really helpful in supporting them, supporting your children as well. And then finally, this is a really broad suggestion, and we can definitely talk more about specifics here, but in general, just communicating with empathy and compassion, right? I also like to add the word humility, right? Like just showing up with like care is a really important way to communicate with our families. Okay. The next one is about communication. So relationships cannot be formed if communication is one-sided. And unfortunately, in a lot of schools that I've worked in, that's basically what it is one-sided. I'm sending home notes, I'm sending home reminders, and I'm not hearing back from my families because there's no way for them to communicate back with me. So therefore, it's really important to establish a variety of ways for two-way communication to take place. First is saying you want to be in contact, right? Like making it clear to families that you want to be in communication. The second is offering various ways to be in contact. So you kind of decide what works best for you and your site and your families, but websites are options. If schools or organizations have their own websites with communication portals, social media, text messages, phone calls, even video calls. There are like I didn't love giving out my personal number, but there are ways to, like, even through Google, to get a phone number that your families have access to. But you can make sure that you're checking at hours that feel good to you and your boundaries, right? Um, Offering on-demand translation services. So if families want to reach out to you, knowing that they will have a way to talk to you. There are ways to do this for free. There's a few different resources, but then also I do know a lot of organizations just kind of like pay to have a service. So that's another option. And then the last one is actively listening to families' needs. This is just an important one, and it does require trust, right, for them to come to you and share what they need. But that kind of the desire to communicate and also the desire to hear from them and what they need from you, it goes a really long way. Okay. And the last one in the relationship building bucket is to share and celebrate good news. This got its own slide because it's really important. It is too often that families are only receiving communication when we need something from them, or we have bad news, or like a critique in some way, right? And so it is so important to be sharing when things go well. You got good news, you've got something to celebrate, you've got maybe even gratitude, and that shifts the way that families are going to receive your communications, right? It does not feel good to only ever receive bad news. But when you're also providing this good news, this growth, this appreciation for the work that they're doing with their child, that will do a lot to build that relationship and that feeling of trust. Okay, I just said a lot. So now we're going to kind of share as a group. I created a Padlet based on Ricardo's suggestion. And the way this Padlet is going to work is that through this one and through the rest of the suggestions, we will always kind of get to the end of what we suggest. And then this is where you put your own best practices, what you've experienced, what you think are ways to approach improving family engagement. So I just put this Padlet in the chat. You can go ahead and click on that link. And you'll see kind of this blank blue and green page that says family engagement strategies. So I'm going to give us a couple minutes, just like the usual. I'm going to put on some music while you can feel free. There's a little plus sign, the bottom right corner of your screen, that will turn into a pencil. You can click that and then write your best practices for developing relationships with your families. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put on some music. I'll give us about 3 to 4 minutes to do that. Thank you all so much. I've seen some really excellent examples of best practices on the Padlet, open communication and being transparent. I responded and said, like, to be on the receiving end of honesty and transparency means so much. Because your families, like, they know when things are going on, like they're hearing things from their kids. Like, it is just so important to share what's going on, what you can and cannot promise. Like, just that open honesty really means so much. Um, Expressing concern and empathy with families helps to build rapport and trust. Absolutely, right? So Ricardo also responded, a great reminder to start from a place of compassion, because many may start from a place of apprehension, right? So kind of knowing, I think it might get into that stigma piece, right? Like knowing that they might be coming with some baggage or trust issues. Maybe they were at another school or another site where things didn't go particularly well. Like starting with a lot of empathy and compassion is critical. Offering childcare, absolutely, that allows people to come. They want to, like, they might want to be there, right? And if childcare is something that we can provide them to make that possible, it's worth it. I really like Jenny's suggestion of creating milestone rituals with students and their families to celebrate big and small progress and victories. I love that. And then calling parents to introduce myself, explain services, ask for preferences, for example, how they would like to receive a consent form, and to make myself available. That's really nice. Like these are the things that I offer. Like, do you have a preference for how we go about that? I think that's that like co-creation, and that's really, really excellent. Thank you all so much. We also have in the chat restorative practices and activities. That is also something that really moves relationships forward in a healthy way. Awesome. Okay, so don't get rid of that link. Don't get rid of that Padlet. We're going to keep adding to it as we go through the strategies. So now we're going to shift to our next series of strategies, which are around partnering with families. And I'm going to pass this to Terry, and Terry is going to walk us through these strategies.
Well, thank you, guys. So I love the part of the milestones and celebrating with any kind of celebration and getting those in there. So I'll give you an example of one of those that I've got right now going on. So I've got a student that's falling behind in her academic work and those kind of things. And she's very into hair, makeup, cosmetology, all those kind of things. So she had a 2.45 hours of total work last week that she did for the entire week. So her buy-in for her celebration of a milestone is if she can get that up to 10 hours this week, she gets to make this 50-year-old guy, you know, his bald head, these eyelashes and all that kind of stuff. She gets to do hair and makeup with me, you know. So that is going to be her buy-in. That's going to be her celebration and her, you know, her milestone achievement. So whatever you can do to get that buy-in, you know, is good with the family. And that's going to be different for everybody, you know. And when we're looking at, you know, engaging the family members, look at that voice that they have. And, you know, while we're on the topic of, you know, I'm a big dude, you know, I'm a big guy. And whenever you look at this engagement with the family, and then we've got all these initials behind our names and all these different things, the families come in from a, you know, a place of intimidation. So we have to make sure that we make it a safe, friendly space for them and take that intimidation factor away. So we want to make sure that we are communicating very positive, as you guys talked about earlier, and make sure that we have useful communication and make sure that we have that humanistic point. You know, we're human as well, and make sure that they understand we are real. You know, we have issues in our lives. We have barriers that we have different things that we have, so that they feel comfortable to share, because many times they come in and there's this big wall. And if we can take that wall down, then you're going to get that engagement. Looking at bringing families into advisory roles, you know, we really want to make sure that we look at what's important to them and look at how we can incorporate the families. You know, is there a family member that's a very good mentor and that kind of stuff? And then celebrating what they do well. You know, I worked for social services for 18 years. And during that 18 years, lots of children were taken away and put into foster homes and those kind of things. And I really encouraged my parents to reach out to those family members because while they didn't do some things well, other things they did very well. So looking at the strengths of the family whenever they come in, and how can we really bolster that? You know, what can we do with those family strengths that you've had? And really take a motivational interviewing type of stance with that family so we can really kick into the things that they've done well. And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I feel like you gave really great examples of like the ways that we connect families to each other, and then how we're like taking down the walls to engagement and making it places where families do feel safe to share, right, their feedback and priorities. Um, I would love to get to share a couple more like strategies to do what you're talking about. And so one of the things that we recommend is when you want your families to share feedback, share priorities and concerns, making sure they do have the option to be anonymous, right? So because sometimes that trust does take a while to build, and so having the option to be anonymous, that the feedback is easy to provide. So there's not a lot of barriers to like submitting a form or to sending that message, and that when you receive that feedback, that you respond in a timely, transparent, and solutions-oriented way, right? I've been in organizations where we asked for feedback and then we looked at it and management was like, what do you want us to do with this? And then we never said anything back to the families, and that harms trust, right? Because they said what they needed and we didn't even respond. And then I think offering opportunities like office hours, opportunities for one-on-ones, surveys, just different ways that families are able to provide kind of that feedback and their experiences. Um,
Yeah, I think it's good to set those expectations too. So when I meet with a new client, first off, I'm going to set those expectations that I'm going to see and work with your student individually. However, I also want buy-in from you. I want you to agree with me that you're at least going to show up for at least one family session a month. You know, and I'm going to throw out those expectations and that buy-in from the very early start that this is not just a program to work on just your child. You know, it's a program to work on the whole system. So I'm going to expect that buy-in at least monthly and hopefully more than that, but at least get that right up front.
Absolutely. And when we're asking for a level of engagement, right? It's providing opportunities for them to actually engage, right? And so they can be these family meetings, but there's also, we can host open houses, we can have potlucks, we can have breakfast. Like my school growing up, we really liked that they're like once a month they would have like donuts and coffee for drop off. And so when families are coming and dropping off their kids, there was an invitation to kind of mingle with the educators and mingle with staff before, heading out on your day. There's also opportunities to recruit family volunteers. I know we had yesterday, someone had mentioned like being asked to uh, go on a field trip, right, with the kids. But there's also other opportunities to facilitate sessions, to translate, to support events, and knowing more about your families and what their skills and interests and strengths are can help support these asks so they feel tailored, right? They feel personal. And I think, Terry, you had mentioned kind of connecting families with each other who've gone through like similar experiences. And I'm thinking affinity groups is something that we can support. connecting families to previous classes. I mentioned yesterday when I would have a child get accepted to a college on the other coast, that I would connect families who had to make those decisions the year before, so they could kind of talk through how they're navigating it, like how they made the decision, how, any addressing fears that they might have, that kind of thing. And then even just supporting families connecting on social media. Like, you don't even have to be a part of it, but just creating an opportunity for them to connect can be really valuable. And then
It can be very valuable to also get, whenever your program is structured, whenever you're looking at your family engagement team, the individuals that have done well, have graduated your program, those kind of things, it can be a very helpful and beneficial person to bring them onto your team for future groups, for future people, because then the individuals coming in see the change from a firsthand stand. So consider that when you're looking at building your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a really good reminder. And final things here for this section is when you're bringing families in to truly partner, right? So putting them in positions and allowing for those positions to actually have a say in what's being done at your site, what's being done in your school. So this can be family teacher associations, family advisory boards, family engagement teams, right? Like we're talking about building. These are all just some examples, and your site will have different needs and opportunities as well for engaging with parents. Time to get to the Padlet again. So I'll go ahead and put a couple minutes on and I'll play some music. But what are some of your best practices partnering with families? Go ahead and share those. I'll put the prompt in the chat and I'll turn on some music for us. If you're still writing things, please keep writing. Would love to see your additions to the Padlet as we're moving through the rest of the suggestions. Um, I'm looking at the clock and I know we've got just under a half hour left, so I'm probably going to start talking a little more quickly and moving a little more quickly, but just reminding all that we're going through these strategies, but your filter is your barrier, right? Like, what is it that you're hoping to address? Is it the trust? Is it communication? Is it transportation? And which of these strategies is a good fit? So I apologize in advance if I'm talking too fast. So the third of the key strategies that we're talking about is supporting staff in their engagement efforts, right? We're people, and sometimes we are going to need more support and guidance and opportunity to really do well in family engagement. So the four key components that we're talking about are first, providing professional learning to staff. And this can include topics like equity, bias, and cultural responsiveness. The second is engaging in mentorship and or a coaching model to support staff who are struggling, staff who are in need of more guidance and support. The third is establishing a school or organizational norms and guidance for family engagement, that everyone's kind of on the same page, we're collectively agreed. And then the fourth is providing funding to support engagement efforts. So first, the professional learning. So providing training and reflection opportunities to learn about bias and how that might be showing up in your engagement with families. The next could be creating a library of resources on important topics related to equity. There's so many good resources out on the internet for free, and just kind of gathering them for staff can be really helpful as well. To take it even further, hosting discussion groups, book clubs, or affinity groups to discuss these topics. So you have these resources, and then maybe you host a book club that, reads an article and then discusses the article and how it applies or doesn't apply to the work that you're doing. And then finally, this is kind of repeated from another section, right? But providing opportunities for staff to learn about their families and their cultures in particular. The second big suggestion is about mentorship and coaching. So we can do these like big picture systemic, we've got trainings, we've got book clubs, we've got resources, but we also want to make sure that we are getting individualized support to our staff if they need it. So this is something that is not to be done punitively, right? It is done to support. So we also are thinking about building trusting relationships as a mentor, as a coach with your staff, and then providing either one-on-one or small group opportunities to discuss issues, develop solutions, and monitor that growth and change. And again, this is strengths-based. This is developing solutions, right? We're solutions-minded. So this is a really excellent opportunity. Just like with anything, like if we need a little extra support, that we're getting what we need. Then there's again, kind of this big picture. So as a whole organization, being on the same page about what family engagement is, what your norms are of family engagement, what the expectations are, and then providing any guidance needed to do that. So first is making sure that we're co-developing with our staff and communicating those clear expectations and norms. But then if you have these expectations, making sure the resources are there to support that work. And that feeds into this last one, which I went back and forth about including it, but at the end of the day, if you are prioritizing family engagement, often that means you need to be putting money towards family engagement. That includes funding to support hosted events, volunteer opportunities. That means paying for food or transportation or that childcare support for those events you're hosting. And it's thinking about also if your staff are being asked to do things outside of their hours, that they're being compensated for that labor. We're not just asking them to do extra work and not paying them for that work. So I just brought that up. that is a tricky one, right? Like that is a whole organization has to figure that out, but wanted to share that as well. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and go back to the Padlet. What are your best practices about supporting staff in improving family engagement? And actually, while we're doing this, yeah, I'll go ahead and play music again, and we'll get back in like about 3 minutes or so. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to keep us moving to the final group of suggestions because I do want us to be able to pick those strategies before the day is out. So this final group is sharing information, best practices, and strategies with families, right? So we are supporting our staff to be successful in this work, but we also want to make sure our families have what they need in order to be successful as well. So the 3 main buckets here are providing families with relevant, helpful information on your school or organization, sharing resources and or providing trainings for families to help them in supporting their child, and providing connections and referrals to help families access needed support outside your school or organization. The first one, I'll just go through briefly. It's just making sure that your families understand how your organization or school works. So giving them information about how even the education system is working, your schedule and hours, your contact information, if there's any special programming, and then if they need any services, how they can seek those services. The next is sharing resources and or providing trainings for families to help them in supporting their child. So this can be sending home materials on the learning being done or what you're working on with the child. It can be offering family workshops. So there were some examples that I found around like a family academy, and one that as a developmental psychologist I really liked was just a workshop on puberty for middle school parents, right? So kind of like what's happening and, what's changing and, what are best practices for supporting your new adolescent. And then again, there's a lot of free resources online. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So just sharing websites, guides, resources that are relevant to what you're working on with the child. And then this one I want to pass to Terry because I know you have a lot of experience providing the support, but making sure that if students have needs that your organization can't meet, that you have strong pathways to providers and support, and that those referrals also have like a warm handoff, right? That you're not just like giving them a phone number and saying go for it, but there's support there. So Terry, can you tell us a little bit more about like how you do this work or how you've seen it done?
Sure. I think it's very important for that warm handoff, because if you don't do that warm handoff, then it feels cold. It feels like you're just passing them on just to not deal with them. And what we have done is on our family engagement team that we have one specific person that she works, that's part of her extra duties, is those referrals. That's one of what she does, and in our team that we all have areas that are kind of our expertise area, and that's going to be hers, is those referrals that need to be made out. She builds those relationships with the community partners so that she has inpatient, intensive outpatient services, all these different community partners that she is contacting on a regular basis and building that relationship with them, so that whenever we are not able to meet the needs that need to be met, we're able to connect those folks, and they're going to have a lot more warm welcome whenever they go to those agencies, to those family support places. And so if you can identify one person to handle that transition of that individual, we found that to be very beneficial, very helpful. Now, when you also are transitioning that person and working with the family, let them know, they're not out of sight, they're not forgotten. We just need additional help to help you. We're here to still be a support to you, to still help and those kind of things. However, we need additional support for whatever reasons that are going on. And I think that helps tremendously with those kind of things.
Thank you, Terry.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so unfortunately, due to time, I'm going to have to just skip over our usual 3 minutes of sharing best practices, but the Padlet is still open. So if you're really good at multitasking, which I am not particularly good at that, feel free to add things to the Padlet, and also it'll stay open. So feel free after this session to add things to the Padlet as well. Okay, so the next step here, we've just talked through all of these strategies, right? And I'm bringing us back that we're in this plan, do, study, act cycle. Is we need to choose the strategy, right? Like, what are we going to focus on first? What's our first attempt going to be to improve family engagement in our context? So this is a strategy that I played around with. And so this is what I'm suggesting, and you can use your own, obviously, of course. But so first, let's say you've got your worksheet and all the things that Terry and I talked about, you have a bunch of them. The first step would be to circle your top 5. And then of those top 5, star the top 3 that have existing facilitators that are supporting them. And then of those 3, you're going to rank them by your likelihood of success. So which one you think would be the most likely to succeed? This will give you your strategy. And because of our timing, I'm not going to be able to allow you to do the 5 minutes to do this, but this is a strategy I'm asking you to take back and to do with your list that you created. Okay, and then this will bring us to phase 2, do. It's wild to me that we're just getting here now, but we put in the work and we're ready. So let's say you did that exercise, you chose the strategy that you want to enact with your team. Now we need to set it in motion. There are 4 questions up on the screen that I like to think about when we're thinking about how to successfully implement a strategy. The first one being, what permissions or consent do you need? I can't think of a single organization where I could just say, I'm doing this thing, and then I just get started, right? Like you have to have support and buy-in, consent. You need permission. So just making sure you know who you need to be talking to. The second is, what materials do you need? The third is, who is going to be involved and in what ways, and how can you engage them? I mean, there is a chance that your team will be the ones doing all the work, but it is also very likely that you're going to need to partner with every teacher or every student-facing staff member, and make sure that you're thinking about how you're engaging with them. And then the fourth is just more thinking about what are the possible challenges or pitfalls, and then how do we prepare for them? So what are the things that we think might get in the way, and then have a backup plan to kind of get around them. These questions are in your worksheet. So after the session, when you have time and space and want to go through it, these are excellent questions to kind of walk through. Okay. This next slide is about data. So in order to see if your strategy is successful, it's important to have data, this baseline data that tells you where you started, and then this outcome data, right, that tells you where you are after implementation, to see if you did have the results that you're looking for. So there's 2 types of data. There's what we call implementation data and outcome data. Implementation data is how well the strategy was implemented, with what level of fidelity or quality, right? So that might be that, 50% of staff actually use the strategy, right? Like that's your kind of implementation data. And then outcome data is what you're focusing on. So are you interested in this increasing attendance at like certain events? Are you interested in this affecting the number of folks who sign up for things, or the number of families that show up for parent-teacher conferences? Whatever it is, you're looking to have data on the outcome, what you want to move the needle on. I want to pass it to Terry real quick too, because I think, Terry, you had suggestions about outcome data and what to keep in mind.
Yeah, things that you need to make sure that you're looking at is, nobody wants to have a 3-page, 5-page survey to complete. So make sure that you're very mindful in what you're looking for. Make sure that it's useful, make sure that it's meaningful, what you're asking people for that input on. And when you're doing that, be very particular about your grantors that are sending you funds and those kind of things. What are they interested in seeing? What are your outcome measures that they're wanting to see, so that you're looking to collect the right data? So make sure that you focus in really narrowly and honestly to get what you actually really need.
Absolutely. And one thing I also like to suggest is that, I mean, the language we use in research is like proximal outcomes versus distal outcomes. So proximal being like things that you would imagine would change soon, versus distal being like down the road, we hope that we would see this change as well, right? So suggesting like that you might not be able to see changes in attendance in the first 6 months, but we hope over the next year to 2 we would see those changes. So choosing your outcomes and knowing how long it'll take to move that needle is also a little guidance that I would suggest. Last thing on this slide is your sources of data. So there is pre-existing data. Most organizations are collecting some sort of data about attendance, about referrals, about, all these different things. And you can also collect your own new data, like observations. You can be observing. You can do surveys, you can do interviews, and you can do focus groups. And this can be with your children, this can be with your families, this can be with your staff. These are all different options that you have. Again, this is in your worksheet. So there is a reflection question where you can kind of think about what implementation data you'd want, what outcome data you'd want, and then what the source is that you would use to find it. Okay. So we're finally at the part of the Plan, Do, Study, Act where you are implementing your strategy. You should feel really proud to get to this point. There's so much planning behind it. It seems a lot easier than it is. You did a lot of work. Congratulations. Then we get into studying. So we just talked about that data, what you'd want to collect. So before you implement, you collect that baseline data, you see what attendance is looking like, you see how families are feeling about this certain aspect of your program, whatever it is. And now you get the data 6 months later, a year later, however long of a window you want to use, and you take a look at the data. There are a lot of really excellent data analysis protocols that exist online, but most of them have these 3 steps that you can do with your team. So first, you describe what you're seeing in the data. So I'm seeing that the numbers for X went up. Then you interpret, what does that data suggest? And I would say, I think that means our families are feeling more comfortable attending this thing. And then discuss, what are the implications? So what does that mean we do now? Like, does it mean we double down? Does it mean we change things? Does it mean we need more data to find out if this is actually kind of causing our outcomes? But the goal of study is to take a look at that data and figure out what your next step is, which leads us to phase 4, ACT. When we think about continuous improvement efforts, this is the step where we decide what we're doing next. So there's 3 options. There's adopting, adapting, and abandoning. Adopting is expanding your strategy. So let's say we did this strategy, we started, sending out these resources, and the data said that it went well and we saw some improvement. So we're going to double down and we're going to continue doing this. We're going to expand it a little bit more. We're going to add different types of resources, whatever it is. The second option is adapting, right? So you can adjust your strategy. So maybe you got mixed results. Maybe some families really liked it, some families didn't like it. And so maybe there's some changes you can make. You're headed in the right direction, but maybe you need to course correct just a little bit. And the last one is abandon. It didn't work. It didn't, and that happens, right? That's why we have this whole list of strategies, right? And so if that's the case, that you see the results and you're like, actually, this isn't working, and we don't think small changes are going to fix it, then we can abandon that strategy and we pick a new one to move forward. So that brings us to the fact that this is a cycle, right? Once we have that data, we've looked at that data and decided what to do next, that puts us back into that cycle, that puts us back into moving forward to see the changes that we're really hoping to see the family engagement that we're really hoping to get to. And that's it. You did it. This is the whole thing. I really appreciate you sticking with us through all of these steps. The sheet that you have, that worksheet, is really, really helpful to continue that process on your own. But Ricardo, correct me if I'm wrong, we will have the recording will be posted, so you'll be able to refer back to this. The slides will be posted. You'll be able to access everything in the slides. And then we're also working on a worksheet that's more designed for you to take back to your team and go through the whole process as a team. So we're hoping to have those resources to use soon. Ricardo, is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. Before we close out, because we've got a couple minutes left, Terry, is there anything, any kernels of wisdom that you have that you'd like to impart before we're closing out?
I do. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of attempting. We all have these, you know, these are wonderful things that we use every day. They're nice and sticky, but not so sticky. They were trying to find an extreme super glue that would lift like thousands of pounds when this was invented. They decided, oh, that glue's not any good, but that's perfect for this. So sometimes what you're setting out for, you may find something that's even better. Don't be afraid of the failure. Edison attempted 1,000 times before he actually got the light bulb right. Don't give up. Sometimes you just have to adapt. Sometimes you have to change. And sometimes you just got to throw the whole thing out and go a different direction because you've got a better product. You've got a better program. So don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of adapting and moving forward. But thank you guys for letting me participate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry. I really appreciate all your insight and kind of grounding at all of these suggestions and ideas in lived experience. I feel like that's been super, super helpful. So I think that's it. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I'll take it from there. And just even this as a visual, Terry, I think that's a really great way to just remind folks as we, I think endeavor to engage, caregivers and family members and inevitably, reach those kind of frustration points. And it's just that reminder of, well, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Is it digestible? Is it reasonable? Or did you bite off too much? Can you adapt? You try different things. And again, just acknowledging that, sometimes it's wonderful when it works the first time, but that's not normally the reality. And so I think just even that visual of like the sticky note, like we all have access to it, but like how do we use it? What are we using it for? I think those are really great reminders. So I think just in closing, just a few things. So one, I would be remiss if I just didn't start by just acknowledging both of our speakers, Teresa and Terry. Thank you both so much for leading these past, 2 sessions yesterday and today. It was great to, I think, blend some practical solutions, some theoretical ideas, some exercises, again, to like leave us with tangible things that we could wake up tomorrow and do. Again, especially appreciate the worksheet and the Padlet and just different ways for us to engage in a very organic way. So really appreciate both of you for that. For those of you who were able to be here for both sessions, that's wonderful. For those of you who weren't, that's okay too. All that to say that we're gonna, as Teresa said, make the PowerPoints for today and yesterday available. The recordings will be available. The resources that were shared will be available. We'll have all that posted in the Safety and Justice Resource Library. And we'll also at some point make probably a post on Basecamp just to let you know that it's available and accessible. So again, we will do our best to kind of get all that information out to you. Then the last thing I'll say in closing is, as you're exiting, there will be kind of an end of webinar survey. Really appreciate all of you that were able to log on yesterday and to complete it. Really appreciate the feedback. If you could do the same thing today, it's wonderful for us. It helps us to get a sense of the topics that are engaging, the places where we can continue to provide enrichment, our styles, all those different types of things. So again, as you're logging off, please just take maybe 45 seconds or so. It's really brief to answer a few questions about your experience today. And other than that, everyone, have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for your time today. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, everyone.